Formula 1 is deceiving us. Have you ever seen this beautiful infographic on the Halo system? Yeah, it's colorful, but it's not quite what's actually happening on the track. And why? Here is the ideal geometric trajectory of the turn. It allows racers to achieve maximum speed. But why do we ignore it since it's so ideal? Maybe because it's only geometrically ideal and doesn't take into account many other factors. Let's figure out the issue of perfect aerobatics together and find out the secret of deceiving Formula 1. Anyone can easily drive fast in a straight line, but understanding how to corner as fast as possible is one of the key principles of racing. In general, the fastest trajectory in a corner is highly important. And this is the same trajectory that straightens the turn as much as possible. Let's compare how long it takes us to slow down in a tight hairpin with a small radius and how fast we can go around a wide open bend. The logic is simple. By expanding the turning radius as much as possible while staying within the track, we will move along the fastest trajectory. To do this, mentally divide the turn into parts. The entry into the turn is the most important point. It determines how we will drive the rest of the apex turn and the exit directly. It's clear that the entry point implies the section of the route where we turn the steering wheel, and it is determined by where we see the apex of a particular turn. The apex is a point at which the car passes as close as possible to the inside of the turn. Apex is also often called the cut point. In addition, apex is that part of the turn where we begin to swing the car outward into the corner while accelerating at the same time. From a purely geometric point of view, the apex is the apex of the turn. If you imagine a turn as a hill, it will be a geometric peak. The apex can also be described as a point at which the car moves slowest, finishes turning and begins to straighten out of it. But not everything is so simple. Geometric apex, or medium as it's also called, is not only the option in terms of racing. It doesn't always lie on the best trajectory for cornering. In addition to it, there are two more: early apex and late apex. Early apex is a point lying on the inner shoulder or median of the road before the geometric apex. In this case, it turns out that the car takes a slight shortcut from the relatively trajectory that includes the geometric apex and then exits the turn wider than it. Later apex is the opposite situation. When the car enters a turn wider than the trajectory containing the geometric apex, touching the inside of the turn after it, and exits the turn along a narrow arc. In fact, there are an infinite number of apexes, as well as cornering trajectories, but if we talk about optimal cornering, there are only 3 options. All others, one way or another, are erroneous and will lead, under positive circumstances, to a serious loss of time. However, it's worth understanding that for each specific turn, the ideal apex may differ from all 3 types, because when passing a turn, there may be different tasks. For example, go through it as quickly as possible, shorten the trajectory as much as possible, save tires, or overtake an opponent. The most striking example of early and late apex is crossing the trajectory when overtaking or defending. If the defending driver chooses the trajectory with an early apex, since he tries to brake as late as possible, then the attacking driver chooses a late apex. He starts braking earlier, turns earlier, and presses the gas pedal earlier. This doesn't mean that the late apex trajectory is faster. No. If the defender's car is faster, he will be able to repel the attack. This is just an example of the driver choosing a trajectory with an excellent apex only for him. From the point of view of car control, the difference between early and late apex is important. When cornering with an early apex, the speed at the entrance to the corner will be higher and the distance traveled will be shorter. At the same time, the early apex allows you to shift the braking point to a later area and increase the distance the car can travel at maximum speed before braking begins. However, this is compensated by a less rapid exit from the turn and along a wider trajectory. In the case of a late apex, the opposite is true. At the entrance, the arc will be wider, the braking will be earlier, and the speed before the apex will be lower. But at the exit after the apex, it will be easier to fit into the turn and, using its entire width, exit it at greater speed, squeezing the gas earlier. Since it's a quick and controlled exit from the turn, it is important for successful completion of the track. A late apex is considered more correct and even in some cases simpler and more reliable. Early apex is often considered a mistake, as it's often the result of missing a turn, which forces you to adjust the steering wheel into the turn, risking the stability of the car and losing speed. Only real professionals who have a keen sense of the car behavior can take advantage of the early apex perfectly. It's also worth noting that the early apex is more popular with racers who prefer the car to oversteer. In their case, the apex itself is driven with a slight drift of the rear axle, which allows the car to be tucked into a turn faster and accelerated earlier. After all, late acceleration is considered one of the disadvantages of early apex. However, when using a late apex, if something happens, nothing can be corrected. It won't be possible to shift the starting point of braking to a later time. And it's also impossible to increase the speed of passing the apex. In this case, the front wheels will lose traction and the rider will go to the side of the road. Essentially, cornering correctly involves using the entire required width of the racetrack. Of course, it will vary in each specific cases. If we have, for example, a combination of two turns with a direct exit, then we must take care of how we get out of the second turn. We need to allow the car to exit the turn as wide as the given section of the track and the grip on it allows us. After determining the optimal turn trajectory, we need to choose the fastest way to complete it. To do this, you need to understand the technique of controlling the car, which we will now analyze. Now let's get back to how Formula 1 deceives us. This is telemetry data, namely the use of the brake. It shows the pressure on the brake vertically and the distance horizontally. Here we see that the rider is pressing the brake on the maximum, and here see a decrease in pedal pressure. This occurs as the car slows down and downforce decreases. This is where the driver enters the turn. This is called hybrid braking. But the infographic shows the brakes as either only active or only inactive, which is not true. I propose to figure out what is actually happening on the track and how the driver acts in these moments. To achieve the best lap time, you must constantly be in a state of either accelerating or braking. Any delay in an uncertain action led to the loss of precious seconds. Each racer tries to accelerate throughout all segments up to the braking zones, and this must be done as quickly as possible. This doesn't always mean that you have to press the gas pedal to the floor all the time. It requires more subtle operation of the gas pedal to achieve the most effective acceleration, taking into account the grip of the tires. So, before braking begins, there is a short period of time that is required to move your right foot from the gas pedal to the brake pedal. Braking with your left foot can reduce this interval to a minimum. It's the ability to use both feet that is most important factor here. Braking should be fairly hard and at predetermined point using the technique of braking at the limit. Due to the weight shift towards the front axle, there is a possibility of locking one or more wheels. But as long as you are moving in a straight line, this is less likely to lead to undesirable consequences than in the case of braking with the steering wheel turned. Before entering the turn, the driver releases the brake pedal or reduces the pressure on it to a minimum, so that the wheels have a reserve of grip necessary for passing the turn. This is especially important for the inner wheel in relation to the turn, on which, due to centrifugal force, the grip is the worst. As they study the track and warm up the tires in practice, the drivers achieve the completion of braking later and later. This is one of the key points, because to achieve the best lap time, you need to brake as late as possible and accelerate out of the corners as early as possible. Ideally, acceleration begins even before the apex, and the turn occurs with a gradual increase in force on the gas pedal. The greatest need for a reserve of wheel grip on the road occurs between the point of entry into the turn and its apex. During this period, it's vital not to put unnecessary stress on the wheels by inappropriate acceleration or braking. It's important to understand that the car must maintain a conditionally neutral balance on this segment until the moment it passes the apex. Understeer and oversteer are most likely to occur in this section. Also, it's worth keeping in mind that the car slows down much faster than it accelerates, so the forces that arise have a high potential for changing the balance of the car and losing traction. Therefore, drivers try as much as possible to avoid wheel locking when braking. The movement of pressing and releasing the pedal occurs in an increasing manner smoothly but not quickly. This will minimize the likelihood of excessive weight transfer of wheel locking when passing the apex. When cornering, most of the load falls on the outer wheels due to the later weight shifting outward. Therefore, if the inner wheel slightly touches the gravel or run over the low curb, nothing bad will happen. The main thing at this moment is not to brake, since at that moment of turning the inner wheels are maximally unloaded. As soon as we touch the apex, we must begin to smoothly straighten. The gas pressure is smooth in most cases. The distribution of the steering wheel in the initial position should coincide with the gas pedal being pressed to the floor. To understand the synchronicity of the gas and steering, you can imagine that we are taking a left turn. A rope is tied to our right hand, and the second end of which is tied to our right leg. When we will try here to turn the steering wheel to the left, the rope tightens and lifts our foot off the gas pedal. And as soon as we press the gas, the rope tightens again and pulls the hand and steering wheel to its original position. This is the perfect synchronization of actions. We have looked at the basic things when going through a combination of several turns. The algorithm becomes somewhat more complicated, but everything is based on thousands of hours of training and, most importantly, the talent of the racer himself. The talent to drive a car to the limit.